The first thing I saw on December 28th was not the lake, not the snow-covered trees, not the cabin where my family had spent almost 50 years of holidays together. It was a wall of concrete blocking the only road. My mother was sitting in the passenger seat crying. My kids were asking if we had to turn around, and 15 people were standing there with bags in their hands, staring at a locked gate like we had somehow become strangers in a place that had belonged to our family for generations. And the person who put that gate there looked me straight in the eye and told me we should find another lake. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 42 years old. I teach history at a high school in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and until that winter, I never thought a simple family cabin could become the center of a fight involving lawyers, television stations, and a $19 million development project. But sometimes the biggest battles do not start because someone wants power or money. Sometimes they start because someone forgets that other people have memories too. My parents bought our cabin on Willamere Lake in 1979. Back then, there were no luxury homes, no private communities, no expensive signs trying to tell people where they could and could not go. There was just a small wooden cabin surrounded by pine trees, a dirt road, and a quiet lake where my dad taught me how to fish when I was 8 years old. It was never a fancy place. The roof leaked a little during heavy storms. The kitchen was outdated, and the furniture looked like it came from 3 different decades because honestly, it did. But every scratch on those wooden floors had a story. Every mark on the wall reminded us of a birthday, a Christmas morning, or summer night when everyone stayed outside talking until midnight. For nearly 5 decades, that cabin was where my family came back to each other. Every New Year's, we gathered there. My brother brought his family. My sister brought hers. My children came running through the snow, and my 76-year-old mother still made her famous fried wally recipe that everyone joked was the real reason people showed up. She would always say, "The cabin is just wood and nails. The people inside are what make it home." I believe that completely. Until someone decided our history was inconvenient. That someone was Mason Caldwell. Mason was 30 years old, the face of Caldwell Shores Development, a company his family had owned for decades. From the outside, he looked like someone who had never heard the word no. Expensive clothes, expensive truck, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that comes from growing up knowing someone else will fix your mistakes. Last spring, his company bought the land surrounding our cabin and announced a luxury lakefront community called Evergreen Reserve. 12 exclusive lots, private docks, custom homes, and a total projected value of nearly $20 million. At first, nobody in our family cared. People develop land. That is how things work. We thought maybe we would have new neighbors. Maybe the dirt road would get improved. Maybe things would change a little. We were wrong about the last part. In July, Mason came to our cabin while my father was repairing the old fence near the road. He stepped out of his truck wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy, which my dad later joked was the first warning sign. Mason smiled politely, but there was nothing friendly behind it. He told my father that the road leading to our cabin would become part of his private development. My dad laughed because he honestly thought Mason was joking. "Son, my family has driven this road since before you were born," my father said. Mason did not laugh back. He simply replied, "Things change. The people who own the land decide what happens next." At the time, we brushed it off. We figured it was just a rich kid trying to sound important. But looking back, that was the moment the real fight started. For months, nothing happened. We enjoyed our holidays. We visited the cabin, and we assumed the issue had disappeared. Then December arrived. The week after Christmas, my entire family packed up and headed to Willamere Lake like we had done every year. The drive was peaceful. Snow covered the trees. The lake was frozen, and everyone was excited. My mother was already talking about making dinner before we even arrived. But when our cars turned onto the final stretch of road, everyone became silent. There was a massive concrete barrier across the entrance. Behind it was a black metal gate, tall enough to look like it belonged at a government facility, not on a dirt road beside a family cabin. Attached to the gate was a brand new sign that said, "Private number, Drive. No trespassing." I got out of the car thinking there had to be some mistake. I walked closer, touched the cold metal gate, and for a moment I just stood there trying to understand what I was looking at. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a message. Mason had not called us. He had not sent a letter. He waited until the holiday season when my entire family was arriving, then physically blocked the only entrance to our home away from home. My mother slowly stepped out of the car. She looked at the gate, then looked back at the cabin sitting in the distance, and her face changed. That was the moment my anger turned into something else, because this was not about a road anymore. This was about someone trying to erase a place that meant everything to us. I pulled out my phone and called Mason. He answered after 3 rings, calm and almost amused. "Claire," he said, "I was wondering how long it would take you to notice." I asked him why he blocked our road. He said, "Because it is private property now. My investors paid for this land. You cannot expect us to let random people drive through a luxury community." I reminded him that my family had used that road for decades. He paused, then said something I will never forget. "Your family had a good run. Maybe it is time to find another lake." I looked at my mother standing beside me, holding back tears, and I realized something. Mason believed this was over because he had money. He believed the gate was the end of the conversation. He had no idea that while he was building walls, he had forgotten one very important thing. Records do not care how much money you have. The next morning, while Mason was probably celebrating what he thought was a successful move, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. I barely slept that night. Not because I was worried about losing a vacation spot, but because I kept replaying my mother's face when she saw that gate. I kept thinking about my father, who had spent decades maintaining that road, clearing fallen branches, filling potholes, and making sure every family member could reach the cabin safely. The idea that someone could simply show up, build a gate, and decide our memories no longer mattered felt impossible. But anger by itself does not win battles. Facts do. My father always taught me that. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice unless he had already checked the paperwork. So instead of calling Mason again, instead of arguing with his lawyers or making a scene online, I decided to find out exactly what we were standing on. I drove 2 hours to the county records office, a small brick building that most people probably walk past without ever noticing. Inside, there were old filing cabinets, dusty shelves, and stacks of maps that looked like they had been untouched for decades. I explained my situation to the clerk, an older woman named Linda who had worked there for over 30 years. She listened quietly as I told her about the cabin, the blocked road, and the new development surrounding us. Then she asked one simple question. "Have you ever checked the original township records?" I told her no. She looked at me and said, "You might want to start there." For the next several hours, we searched through archived documents. Some records were typed, some were handwritten, and some were so old that the ink had faded. I remember feeling like I was looking through pieces of forgotten history. Then Linda placed a large folder on the desk. Inside was a township plat map from 1912. She unfolded it carefully, almost like she was opening a piece of family history, and there it was. The road leading to our cabin was not a private road. It was not something Mason could buy, close, or claim as his own. It was a public access right-of-way that had existed for more than 100 years. I stared at the map for a long time because suddenly everything changed. Mason had spent millions buying the land around us, but he had missed something that was sitting in plain sight. The road was never his to block. I took pictures of the documents, requested certified copies, and walked to that office feeling something I had not felt since the gate went up. Hope. But I also knew something important. Having the truth and proving the truth are two different things. Rich people do not usually back down because someone finds a piece of paper. They fight, and I knew Mason would fight. When I got home, I called the county road department. I explained everything, provided the documents, and asked them to review the situation. The official I spoke with did not make promises, but his tone changed when he heard the words public right-of-way. Then I did something that Mason definitely did not expect. I contacted the local newspaper, the Cedar Valley Chronicle. I was not trying to become famous. I was not trying to embarrass anyone. I just knew that when someone with money tries to quietly push ordinary people aside, sunlight is sometimes the best protection. 2 days later, a reporter named Hannah Pierce arrived at the cabin. She walked the road, photographed the concrete barriers, and interviewed everyone. She spoke with my father about using that road since the late 70s. She spoke with my mother, who honestly did not want attention but finally admitted how hurt she was. "I never thought I would need permission to visit my own family's home," my mother told her. That quote ended up being the headline. When the article went live, everything changed. People in the community started talking. Some supported Mason, saying development brings money and jobs. Others said there was something wrong with the company trying to lock out longtime residents without checking the facts first. The story spread faster than I expected. Then Mason's attorney called me. The tone was completely different from Mason's confidence a few days earlier. The lawyer claimed I was interfering with a private development and threatened legal action if I continued making false accusations. I remember sitting at my desk reading that email and almost laughing, not because it was funny, but because it showed they still believed intimidation would work. So I replied with 3 attachments: the certified township map, the county records, and the newspaper article. I did not write a long message. I simply said, "Please review the attached documents before taking further action." After that, the silence was immediate. No more threats. No more aggressive emails. Just silence. On December 31st, the county finally arrived at the gate. I was there with my father when the inspectors walked up. Mason was there too, and for the first time since this began, he did not look like the person in control. The officials reviewed the documents, measured the road, and placed official notices on the barriers. Public right-of-way, unauthorized obstruction. The same gate Mason built to show power became the evidence against him. A few hours later, the Cedar Valley Chronicle published another story. This time, the headline was impossible to ignore. Luxury developer blocks historic access road during family holiday. Television stations picked it up. Cameras showed the gate, the documents, and the families affected by the decision. Suddenly, a private dispute was no longer private. It was a public question about whether wealth should allow someone to ignore history. On New Year's Day, Mason's father called me. His voice was completely different from Mason's. He was not angry. He sounded exhausted. He told me they wanted to resolve everything quietly. He said the company had investors, contracts, and buyers who were getting nervous. I listened, but I remembered my mother standing in the snow. I remembered my kids asking why we could not get to our cabin, and I told him something simple. I don't want revenge. I want the road opened, and I want everyone to understand that it should never have been closed in the first place. What happened next was something even I did not expect, because the gate was only the beginning of Mason Caldwell's problems. The real damage was not the concrete barrier. It was what happened when people started looking deeper into the project he thought was untouchable. The thing about a mistake made in public is that it rarely stays the size of the original mistake. Mason thought he was dealing with one family complaining about one road. What he did not understand was that once the county opened the records, everyone connected to Evergreen Reserve started asking questions. The same documents that proved our family had the right to reach our cabin also exposed a problem for his luxury development. The road was not just a convenient driveway. It was part of the legal access structure connected to the entire project. And when title companies started reviewing the property records for potential buyers, they found the same thing we had found. The road was protected. It was not something Mason could quietly turn into a private entrance for wealthy homeowners. 3 families who were preparing to purchase lots in Evergreen Reserve immediately backed out. These were not small purchases. These were million-dollar lakefront properties. But when those buyers saw the news coverage and their attorneys explain the access issue, they decided the risk was not worth it. The dream homes Mason was selling suddenly had a question mark attached to them. Investors who had been impressed by the beautiful renderings and expensive promises started asking different questions. They were no longer asking how quickly the houses could be built. They were asking why a developer with a $19 million project failed to discover a public right-of-way before installing a massive gate. On January 4th, the county ordered the gate removed. I stood across the road with my father as workers dismantled the same structure that had blocked us days earlier. There was no celebration, no yelling, no dramatic moment where we cheered. Honestly, I felt something much quieter, relief, because that gate was never just metal and concrete to us. It represented the idea that someone could come along with enough money and make our history disappear. Watching it come down felt like watching someone finally admit they were wrong. The removal and repairs cost Mason's company more than $30,000. But the financial hit was only beginning. The county later filed a complaint against Caldwell Shores Development for the unauthorized obstruction of the public access route. After negotiations, the company agreed to a settlement of $75,000 to compensate our family for being wrongfully prevented from reaching our property. But the most important part came afterward. The township changed the development requirements for Evergreen Reserve. The company was now permanently responsible for maintaining that public road. A new covenant was added requiring them to pay $650 every month for maintenance, upkeep, and access protection. If they failed to maintain the road or interfered with public use again, their permits could be suspended. The road Mason tried to take away became the responsibility he could never escape. A few months later, Mason moved away. Some people said he went to Arizona because he wanted a fresh start. Others said he simply wanted to avoid the reputation he had created for himself. I never knew the real reason, and honestly, I stopped caring. What mattered was that my family was back where we belonged. The next New Year's Eve, we returned to Willowmere Lake. The same old cabin was waiting for us. The same wooden floors, the same fireplace, the same view of the frozen lake outside the window. My mother cooked her fried wally. My kids played cards at the table, and my father sat in his favorite chair telling stories he had told 100 times before. And nobody complained, because those stories were the reason we were there. At midnight, we raised our glasses together, not because we had defeated someone, not because we had won some kind of war. We raised our glasses because a place that mattered to us was still standing. I learned something from that experience. Sometimes people assume power comes from money, influence, or owning the biggest piece of land. But there are things money cannot buy. It cannot erase records. It cannot rewrite history. And it cannot replace the trust of a community once people realize they have been treated unfairly. Looking back, I still think about that first day when we saw the gate blocking the road. At that moment, it felt like we had lost everything. But sometimes the thing that looks like the end is actually the moment when you start looking deeper. The question is, what would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have fought for a place your family had loved for decades? Or would you have walked away and avoided the battle? Do you think Mason was just protecting his investment? Or did he cross a line by trying to erase a family's connection to their own home? I want to hear your thoughts. Share your opinion in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. And if you have ever faced a situation where someone with more money or power tried to push you aside, share that story too. Sometimes the most important victories do not come from having the most resources. Sometimes they come from knowing what is right, standing your ground, and refusing to let someone else decide that your memories do not matter. If you enjoy stories about justice, property battles, and ordinary people standing up when the odds are against them, make sure to subscribe and join us for the next story.